Have you ever been in a conversation where you knew saying nothing was smarter than saying something? You held back, you swallowed the words, you let silence speak, and maybe for a moment that silence gave you peace or power. But then the questions started creeping in. Did they understand what I meant? Did they feel my absence, or did they just move on? Did my silence create clarity or distance? You see, we've all been taught that silence is strength. That silence is strategy. That silence makes a person wonder, chase, or reflect. And yes, sometimes it does. But here's what no one tells you. There is a kind of silence that breeds confusion, a silence that starts as self-protection but turns into self-destruction, a silence that doesn't heal but hardens. And then there's something even more subtle, a deeper strategy, one that looks like silence but isn't, one that feels calm on the surface but holds enormous influence underneath. It's not passive, it's not avoidance, it's not detachment masked as wisdom, it's something else entirely. And today I want to share it with you, because when you learn this, when you understand the strategy that's better than silence, you won't have to pull away to feel strong. You won't need to disappear to be respected. You'll stop punishing people with distance and start influencing them with presence. Let's talk about it. There's a strange moment that happens between people, especially people who once loved each other, or still do but aren't sure how to show it. It's not the yelling, it's not the fighting, it's not even the tears, it's the quiet after, the moment when neither one of you speaks. When the room grows heavier not because something was said, but because too much was not, you think, maybe silence will keep the peace. Maybe silence will teach them a lesson. Maybe if you don't respond, they'll understand how deeply they hurt you. Or maybe you just don't have the words anymore. You're not even sure they deserve your words, so you say nothing. And for a while it feels powerful. There's space, there's distance, there's control, but then something subtle begins to shift. That silence, once sharp and deliberate, begins to soften. It gets foggy, and suddenly it's not strategy anymore. It's just avoidance. Or worse, neglect, because silence can only be a language if the other person is still listening, if they're still tuned in, if the bond is still intact enough to hold meaning in the pauses. But when silence stretches too long, it doesn't sound like a message. It sounds like absence. And people don't respond well to absence. They don't stay curious forever. At first, they may try to decode your silence, but eventually they start to rewrite the story without you. You see, silence can create mystery, but it can also create misunderstanding. It can make someone miss you, or make them feel like you never cared at all. So what's the alternative? If speaking up only leads to conflict, and silence only leads to disconnection, then what's left? Here's where we begin to shift the frame, because the answer is not in what you don't say, it's in what you show. Not the withdrawal, but the calibration. What's better than silence is something I call calibrated presence. And no one teaches us how to do this. We're taught to either react or retreat. We either chase or vanish. But what about choosing to stay without saying too much? What about remaining visible but grounded? Communicating without oversharing, signaling without demanding, that's calibrated presence. It means you stay in the room emotionally, but with self-possession. You don't disappear, you don't explode, you become a mirror, but not one that simply reflects, one that invites. Instead of silence, you offer stillness. Instead of vanishing, you hold your space. You remain clear-eyed, warm and contained, not cold, not distant, not detached, but rooted. And the first step to this kind of presence is simple, though not easy. You must learn to regulate your emotional body before you use your verbal voice. You see, most people try to communicate while they're still vibrating with emotion. They try to explain things while they're hurt, scared, or angry. And when your emotional system is dysregulated, your words come out coated in confusion, sarcasm, blame, or pleading. But when you've calmed the emotional storm inside, when you can feel your heartbeat steady, when your breath is deep again, you regain access to something so many people lose in conflict, your dignity. Dignity is not pride. Dignity is not arrogance. It's the deep, quiet sense that you are intact, that you don't need to prove your value, only embody it. A man or woman who can stand in their dignity, who doesn't beg for love, nor punish its absence, that person creates a gravitational pull. They become a force, and it doesn't take shouting, it doesn't take leaving. It takes emotional clarity, energetic stillness, and relational awareness. Now, let's imagine something. A woman you love, your partner, your wife, your lover, says something sharp. Maybe it's meant to provoke, maybe it's defensive, maybe it's her fear disguised as control. In the past, you might have shut down, gone quiet, pulled away to show her you won't be mistreated. But what if instead you stayed, not with reactive energy, not to argue or explain? You just stayed grounded, eyes soft, shoulders relaxed. You didn't try to fix. You didn't try to disappear. You just let her words land, and you didn't interrupt them. That moment, your presence in that moment, says more than silence ever could. It says, I am not here to compete. I am not here to run. I am not here to dominate or disappear. I am here, and I am whole. When someone expects silence and instead meets stillness, it resets the entire relational dynamic. Stillness is not passive. It's charged, it holds power, it holds presence, it invites the other person to rise, not recoil. So the next time you feel the urge to go silent, to disappear, to withhold, to emotionally evacuate, ask yourself, am I actually protecting myself? Or am I punishing them? Am I maintaining dignity? Or am I avoiding vulnerability? There's a difference between silence that preserves intimacy and silence that erodes it. And the only way to know is to feel the truth of your own energy, because silence is easy. Anyone can ghost. Anyone can withhold. But presence, that's a decision. That's a skill. That's a practice. It's what turns good men into grounded men. It's what turns defensiveness into depth. It's what changes the climate of a relationship without needing to change the person in it. And it all begins not with your voice, but with your energy. It's a strange truth about human connection, how much of our power lies not in what we say, but in how we hold ourselves in the moments between words. You've probably noticed this, the way a room changes when someone walks in and doesn't need to speak. The energy shifts, eyes notice. There's a kind of attention that doesn't have to ask for itself. That's the power of presence. And yet, presence is often misunderstood. People think it means being loud, being visible, taking up space with force. But real presence, calibrated presence, is rooted in how you take up space, not how much you take. When a man walks into a room with a nervous, overcompensating energy, people sense it. They may nod, smile, play polite, but underneath they feel something is off. But when a man walks in grounded, aware of himself, not trying to prove or perform, people don't just hear him, they feel him. He doesn't need to speak to be heard. This is what I want for you. Not performative power, but authentic groundedness. Not the kind of silence that's weaponized, but the kind of energy that's aligned, because when your nervous system is settled, your words become optional. Your body, your gaze, your stillness, those become your language, and they say everything. Now, there's something that happens when you start to embody this energy. People test you, they want to know, is this real? Is this calm a mask, or a mastery, so they may poke? They may provoke, they may challenge you with familiar patterns, accusations, assumptions, passive aggression. It's not always conscious, but it's real, especially in romantic relationships, when old wounds, old dances, and emotional reflexes show up like clockwork. So how do you hold your calibrated presence in the face of that? The answer is subtle but crucial. You create micro boundaries without creating emotional distance. Let me explain. Most people only set boundaries after they've been pushed too far. They explode, they pull back. They make declarations, but calibrated presence means you don't wait until you're overwhelmed. You learn to respond early, gently, consistently. You communicate through energy, body language, and tone, not just through ultimatums. For example, imagine you're in a heated moment with your partner. She raises her voice, not wildly, but just enough to sting. Instead of matching her tone or going silent to punish her, you stay present, but you shift. You lower your voice, not in weakness, but in intention. You take a breath before you speak. You pause before you answer. You're not checking out. You're inviting her to check back in. And if she keeps escalating, you don't retaliate. You simply say softly, clearly, I want to have this conversation, but not like this. That's a micro-boundary. It doesn't shame. It doesn't withdraw love. It doesn't abandon. It just gently refuses the invitation to chaos. It anchors, and over time, when done consistently, this kind of anchoring teaches people how to interact with you. It resets the emotional temperature. It reconditions the space between you and them. This isn't manipulation. This isn't control. It's relational intelligence, because emotional connection doesn't thrive in emotional volatility. It thrives in attunement, in rhythm, in a space where both people feel seen and safe. You're not asking the other person to be perfect. You're just modeling a new way to engage, a new tempo, a new possibility. Now, this doesn't mean your partner, or anyone, will always rise to that energy. Some people are so used to conflict and chaos that calm feels suspicious. Some have lived in emotional deserts for so long that intimacy makes them panic. That's not yours to fix. What is yours is your response. You can choose to remain open without being unguarded. You can be available without being vulnerable to disrespect. You can stay loving without becoming self-sacrificing. And the way you do that is by understanding that the most powerful influence you have is the energy you bring into the room. So the next time you're tempted to go quiet, to disappear, to punish with absence, to hide behind noble silence, ask yourself, is this about preserving peace or preserving pride? Is this about creating safety or avoiding discomfort? Because silence often protects us from the discomfort of being seen. But presence, real, grounded, calibrated presence asks us to be felt, and that can be terrifying, yes. But it's also magnetic, it's healing, it's intimate. There's something deeply human, even erotic, about someone who can stay open under pressure, who can stay soft in a hard moment, who can stay kind without folding. You don't have to speak volumes. You don't have to impress. You don't have to prove. You just have to hold your energy, stay in the room, and trust that your presence is enough. Because when you're centered, clear, and emotionally calibrated, you become unforgettable, and not because you disappeared, but because you stayed and still chose yourself. Sometimes the hardest thing to believe is that staying doesn't mean surrendering. That standing in your presence, without turning away or turning cold, can be more powerful than silence, more dignified than withdrawal, and more intimate than 1,000 rehearsed speeches. But it takes practice, it takes emotional maturity. Because to be fully present without being reactive, especially in relationships that touch our core, is one of the most demanding emotional tasks we will ever face. And yet, it's the exact skill that changes everything. Let's talk about what this looks like in real life. Because theory is elegant, real life is messy. Maybe you're the kind of man who retreats when there's conflict. You don't want to escalate. You were raised to keep the peace, to stay calm, to not make it worse. So you step back. You go quiet. You wait for the storm to pass. But here's the truth. Your silence doesn't always bring peace. It often brings confusion. Because in the absence of clear, grounded presence, people project, and projections are rarely kind. She doesn't think he's calming himself down. She thinks he's done with me. He doesn't care. He's shutting me out. And so her voice rises, not because she's trying to overpower you, but because she's trying to feel you. She's trying to reach you through the silence, and when that doesn't work, she spirals. Maybe she gets mean. Maybe she gets desperate. Maybe she shuts down too, and now you're both gone. Two people in the same room, both craving connection, neither knowing how to give it without losing themselves. This is where calibrated presence becomes a bridge, a relational lighthouse, a way of being that says, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to see you, and I want you to see me too. Sometimes that means sitting in the same room and letting the silence stretch, but not as a weapon, as a container. A place for emotions to settle, for bodies to breathe, for nervous systems to recalibrate. Other times it means speaking gently even when you're flooded. Saying things like, I'm struggling to find my words right now, but I'm still here with you. You have no idea how healing that sentence can be. How much it tells someone you're not being abandoned. I'm just tending to myself so I don't hurt you in the process. That is emotional leadership. That is presence in action. But let's also be honest. Not everyone will respond well to your grounded presence. Some people will be unnerved by it, because when you stop reacting the way they expect, when you don't collapse or attack or run, it disrupts the dance they've always known. And suddenly they're not just arguing with you, they're arguing with their own patterns, their old stories, their childhood defenses, and that can feel destabilizing. So what happens then? You hold your frame. Not rigidly, not with cold defiance, but with compassion, with clarity. You hold the emotional tone of the moment not to control the other person, but to guide the space between you. Think of it like this. In every relational moment there's a climate, a tone, an energy, and someone always sets it. When you stop outsourcing that responsibility, when you stop letting your partner, your boss, your child, your friend set the emotional weather, you begin to reclaim your relational power. Not dominance, not control, influence, the kind that says, I'm responsible for the energy I bring, and I'm choosing one that invites intimacy, not chaos. And now, here's a deeper truth. This presence, this energetic leadership, this refusal to disappear, it will change you. Because when you stop relying on silence as your shield, you start developing a more courageous kind of vulnerability. You stop hiding behind absence and start learning how to stay in love without losing self. You become a safer space not just for others, but for yourself. You become the kind of man who knows how to say, I'm here, not because I have to fix you, not because I want to win, but because connection matters to me. And I refuse to abandon myself or you in the process. And sometimes this presence will reveal what words never could. You'll begin to see more clearly who meets you there and who doesn't, who is capable of co-regulating with you and who only knows how to connect through conflict. This is not about judgment. It's about discernment. It's about recognizing that while love can be loud, love can also be still. And the stillness tells you the truth, so next time you're in that moment, that split second where you feel the urge to retreat, to shut down, to go silent, pause. Feel your feet on the ground. Breathe deeper than your instincts tell you to. Keep your eyes soft, keep your chest open. And ask yourself, can I stay here not as a warrior, not as a fixer, but simply as a presence? If you can do that even for 30 seconds, you've already changed the relationship. Not just with the other person, but with yourself. There's something haunting about the silence that follows disconnection. Not the kind that comes from peace, from mutual understanding, or the stillness after a deep, shared breath. I'm talking about the kind of silence that lingers after misunderstanding, after misalignment. The silence that doesn't soothe but starves. That doesn't invite closeness, but confirms suspicion. You begin to notice it in the small ways. the way her tone shifts when you walk in the room, the way the warmth in your text threads starts to dry out, the way you both pretend that we're just tired is enough of an explanation for the cold between you. You think maybe if I don't say anything it'll pass, maybe if I stay silent I won't make it worse. Maybe she'll come around, but silence is not a vacuum. It doesn't stay empty. It gets filled with assumptions, with past wounds, with the echoes of old arguments that were never truly laid to rest. And here's the hard part to accept. Even if your intentions are good, silence often speaks in a language the other person cannot translate. It becomes a mirror, yes, but sometimes it reflects back their worst fears, and if they've ever felt unseen, unworthy, unwanted, they will hear your silence as abandonment, not wisdom. That's why calibrated presence is so powerful. It doesn't just hold space, it shapes it. It allows you to remain connected even when the words are scarce. It lets your partner feel your emotional availability even when there's tension in the air. Because calibrated presence doesn't mean you always have the right thing to say. It means you're still reachable, still emotionally present, still choosing to stay with the person not just physically, but energetically. And in a world where most people are used to disappearing when things get hard, that choice to stay is intimate. It's rare, it's magnetic. You see, emotional intimacy is not about always being perfectly attuned, it's about returning. Repairing, re-engaging again and again and again, but you can't re-engage if you've gone emotionally offline. This is where many relationships begin to decay, not from explosive conflict, but from the slow, quiet erosion of presence. From the habit of disconnecting to avoid discomfort, from the belief that silence is safer than transparency. But what if you stopped seeing discomfort as something to escape, and instead saw it as something to explore? Discomfort isn't always a sign that something's wrong. Sometimes it's a doorway, an invitation, a moment asking, will you lean in or will you check out? Because people don't just want to be loved, they want to be felt. They want to know that you're in the room, not just with your body, but with your soul. So the next time your partner is hurt or hurting you and your instinct is to go silent, I want you to do something revolutionary. Stay without fixing, without defending, without disappearing. Just stay with your breath, with your presence, with your attention. You don't even need the perfect words. Sometimes a soft gaze, a steady hand, a simple "I'm here" does more than a perfectly crafted apology. And if you're the one who's hurting, if your silence is coming from pain rather than punishment, let that be known. You can say, I need a moment to catch my breath, but I don't want to push you away. That simple phrase can save a relationship. It tells the other person, I need space, but I'm not abandoning us. You see, when people know the difference between silence and presence, they stop fearing your stillness. They stop wondering if you've disappeared. They stop bracing for rejection. Instead, they feel your steadiness, your emotional availability, your choice to remain human in the face of pain, and that is intimacy. That is the kind of connection that builds trust not just once, but over time, through missteps, through emotional misfires, through growing pains, because love isn't built in the easy moments, it's built in the hard ones, the quiet ones. The ones where you don't have all the answers, but you refuse to walk away. And when you live like that, when you learn to stay emotionally open while setting boundaries, when you choose presence over punishment, when you become the calm in someone's storm without losing your own center, you change the relational climate not just in your home, but in your heart. You stop performing love and you start embodying it. You stop managing connection and you start deepening it. You stop relying on silence to send a message and you become the message. And people feel it. Whether they say it or not, they feel it. Because nothing feels safer, more grounded, or more unforgettable than a person who knows how to stay emotionally available in moments when most people disappear. What no one teaches us, what no relationship manual really explains, is that so much of love isn't about the words we say, but the energy we hold when nothing is being said. It's the space between sentences, the moment right before you answer, the decision not to rush to fix or flee or dominate, but to stay right there. Still, attentive, soft-eyed and open-hearted, and yes, it's terrifying, because presence means exposure. You're not hiding behind silence, you're not distracting with noise, you're just there, bare, real. Unarmored, and that kind of presence takes courage, especially if you've spent a lifetime being told that your emotions are too much or not enough, especially if you were raised in homes where silence was used as punishment, as control, as withdrawal, where communication meant tension, where love was loud or love was absent. You carry those templates into your adult relationships. And so when your partner says something that hits a wound, your instinct may not be to speak. It may be to protect, to pull away, to go invisible, and it may feel like strength. But what if the real strength was staying? Not forcing a response, not offering fake calm, but actually allowing yourself to be present and feel everything that's rising, and still hold your emotional tone. This is emotional self-mastery, and it's not about suppressing your truth. It's about giving your truth a place to land, a structure, a dignity, so that when you do speak, your words don't come from defense, they come from clarity. And sometimes presence is not just what holds the moment, it's what transforms it. Let me show you what I mean. A man I worked with, let's call him David, was married for 15 years. He and his wife had grown distant, not because they didn't love each other, but because both of them had learned to disappear in different ways. She with criticism, he with silence. Arguments would end not with resolution, but with retreat. He thought he was being noble. Not yelling, not fighting, just walking away, letting things cool down. But what he didn't see was that his wife wasn't asking him to fix everything. She was asking him to stay emotionally in the room with her pain. She didn't need the perfect words. She just needed to feel that he hadn't left her there alone. And every time he went silent, every time he shut down to avoid escalation, she felt more and more abandoned. Not physically, emotionally. It took one moment to shift it. One evening, she got upset about something seemingly small. He started to pull back like always, but this time he didn't leave the room. He didn't respond right away either. He just sat down, he stayed, he looked at her not with fear, not with defense, but with presence. When she realized he wasn't walking away, she didn't escalate. She softened, her voice cracked, and she said, "I thought you were going to leave again." And he said, "I'm not. I'm still here. I don't know what to say, but I'm not leaving." That moment, those few words repaired something that months of explanations never could. Because you can't talk someone into safety. You have to show them safety. You have to let your presence be felt more than your silence is noticed. You have to remember that people don't fall in love with your logic. They fall in love with the way your energy makes them feel. And that doesn't mean you're responsible for their emotions, but you are responsible for the emotional environment you bring. When you become that kind of presence not just with others, but with yourself, you stop fearing conflict. You stop needing to ghost, to punish, to disappear, because you know how to remain. You know how to listen without losing yourself. You know how to hold space without holding your tongue in resentment. You know how to stay grounded without having to overpower. And you know how to be honest, not brutally, not manipulatively, but humanly. There is a strategy far better than silence. And that strategy is the art of staying fully present in moments when every part of you wants to shut down. Because when you stay present, not perfect, not performative, just present, you change the atmosphere. You open a door that no amount of silence could ever force open. You don't need to vanish to be respected. You don't need to withhold to be heard. You just need to be fully here and to trust that this, your real, regulated, emotionally clear presence, is enough. If you've made it here, if you've followed this journey through the subtle layers of communication, silence, and presence, then you already know something most people spend their lives missing. You know that silence is not always wisdom, that absence isn't always protection, that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is not to disappear, not to punish, not to pull away, but to remain. Calm, open, rooted. You've probably realized by now how rare that is. In a world that glorifies detachment and ghosting, that teaches us to guard our hearts at all costs, to speak less, feel less, need less, presence is revolutionary. You see, people don't crave perfection, they crave safety, they crave attunement, they crave the steady pulse of someone who doesn't vanish at the first sign of discomfort. And you become unforgettable, not because you're always right or always composed, but because you stay when others leave. You stay when it's easier to run. You stay emotionally connected, even when it feels vulnerable to do so. That's not just love, that's leadership. Relational leadership is what happens when you're no longer ruled by your emotional reactions, but guided by your emotional intelligence. When you don't just hold your tongue, you hold your space. You don't explode, you don't implode, you become the lighthouse in someone's storm. And even if the other person can't meet you there, even if they haven't yet learned to respond with the same grounded presence, you've still changed the dynamic. You've broken the old pattern. You've proven to yourself that you can remain dignified in intimacy, that you don't need to punish to be respected, that you don't have to vanish to be missed, and most importantly, that your presence is no longer dependent on someone else's emotional weather. You've become your own anchor, and from that place every conversation becomes clearer, every rupture becomes easier to repair. Every relationship becomes more honest because you're showing up fully. Now let me say this to the man who's been hurt, to the woman who's tired of being misunderstood, to the person who's been told their silence was strength, when really it was fear wrapped in stillness. There's nothing weak about needing connection. There's nothing naive about showing up in love again. There's nothing foolish about staying present, even when the past taught you to run. You are not a fool for feeling deeply. You are not less masculine or less powerful for holding someone gently. And if you ever needed permission to stop using silence as a strategy, let this be it. Speak with your energy. Lead with your breath. Offer your presence like a gift that asks for nothing in return, but changes everything it touches, because that's what intimacy really is, not the loud declarations, not the fancy words, but the way someone feels in your presence. Do they feel safer, calmer, more themselves? Or do they feel like they're walking on eggshells, unsure what your silence means this time? You don't need silence to be mysterious. You don't need distance to create desire. You don't need to vanish to feel powerful. What you need is clarity. What you need is attunement. What you need is to show up, again and again, as the kind of person who stays, who repairs, who breathes through the discomfort instead of escaping it, and when you do, you become the kind of partner everyone hopes for, the kind of lover who listens with their whole body, the kind of human who doesn't flinch when emotions rise, the kind of presence people remember not because you left, but because you remained. So this is your invitation, not to be louder, not to be more clever, but to be more here. Let silence go where it belongs, not between hearts, but inside your breath as a pause, not a punishment. Let your presence be the new strategy, because when you learn to stay not just physically but emotionally, you stop needing to win. You stop needing to disappear. You start loving from your center, and there is nothing more powerful than that.